Before I start the show, I want to provide a trigger warning. This episode contains discussions about sensitive topics, including this week's guest's experience with his mother's murder not being investigated by the police in Thunder Bay. The content may be distressing for some listeners. If you find these kinds of discussions difficult, please take care of yourself and consider whether you want to proceed. If you need support, don't hesitate to reach out to friends, family, or mental health professionals. The FNRad Snowboard Podcast is presented by Skyview Campers, Never Summer's innovative take on the tiny home. Designed and built in beautiful Colorado, check out skyviewcampers.com. Wired Snowboards builds quality snowboards by hand 10 minutes away from my house. Visit wiredsnowboards.com and order one today. Fixed bindings are easy to adjust, long-lasting, high-performance bindings built to have less impact on the environment. Check out fixedbindingco.com. Rip Curl outerwear, strength, durability, and performance. Designed to search further in the snow, head to ripcurl.com and check out the Anti-Series jacket. I can't wait to rock this thing. The Boardroom Snowboard Shop, best selection, best prices, Vancouver's premier snowboard shop. Go to boardroomshop.com and use code FNRAD10 to save 10% off your next purchase. New Greens, 100% organic, vibrant green juice. Buy yourself some at newgreens.com and use code FNRAD at checkout for 20% off. And for a chance to try New Greens for free, listen to the end of the show. Support also comes from Mount Seymour, Grouse Mountain, Cypress Mountain, the Pro Standard GoPro accessories, and our friends at 1910. You can use code FNRAD at checkout for 20% off at 1910.com. The Havens, a center for transformational learning located on beautiful Gabriola Island. Plan a visit at haven.ca and use code FNRAD at checkout to save 10% off their Come Alive program. Court Larabee, or Blackbird, the English translation of his Anishnaabe name, which he uses when doing spiritual work, is a snowboarding powerhouse who's dedicated to raising spirit in the Indigenous community. He won Whistler's Rising Star Award, competed in the Amazing Race Canada 8, became a celebrated actor, all while helping run the Indigenous Life Sports Academy, an organization that brings Indigenous youth snowboarding on their territorial lands. Lately, Court's been bridging the gap between resorts, cat and heli operations, and the Indigenous people upon whose land their operations exist. He's an amazing snowboarder with an amazing story. Stoked to bring you this episode with Court Larabee.
So it was winter. Grew up in a family that wasn't really, we weren't able to, go to the ski hill or play hockey, like the typical things that kids in Thunder Bay do to fit in the rest of them. But I went sliding over at this local kid's house, and he was known as the kind of like the black sheep, the ones like your mom's like, maybe you shouldn't be hanging around this kid. So hanging out with this kid, and he goes, check this out. I was like, what's that? And he brings me to like this back shed area where he has got a couple boards leading up, like plywood boards. He pulls back the plywood boards, and he's got this wild single-nosed snowboard as I knew what it was, but it was like all white because it had been painted at least twice with house paint. Pretty indicative of a board that might have been stolen a couple times before.
A couple times.
So,
right.
Anyways, immediately riding this thing, I'm like, yo, I am in. He goes, well, what are you going to give for it? Give me for it. So I'm like, I've got no money. I've got no anything. So lo and behold, I trade my summer bike that I got for my birthday in August, like just before winter.
Oh, shit.
For this board. So I was like, I hid this board in my woodshed. I was like, no one in my family could ever know about this. Or I'm like, I'm as deep shit as you can ever get. Like a super Christian based home. I'm like, I'm asking for it. Like, so I think it was about 2 months of me hiding this board in my woodshed. And then finally I come out one day, my mom's holding it. She goes, what is this? And she immediately thought that I stole it. And I was like, hold on, secondhand, maybe stolen, but this is like, I traded my bike and just started crying like a young kid, like, you know,
Right.
I'm sorry. And she just turned to me and looked, she was, what did you trade it for? Like, where did you get the money? Like, and I was like, my bike. And just more tears just bawling down because I know how hard they worked to get me the bike. And she looked at me and she just like, in a way of compassion, she just looked at me and said, well, you better freaking love it.
That's awesome.
So from that day on, I would grab that board and didn't have to hide it anymore from my family. I grew up in rural Thunder Bay, so it's like there was no ski hills directly around me, but we had Thunder Bay has the biggest hills between Quebec and Alberta. So we did have a chance to learn about snowboarding on the hills, but I didn't have the money to go. So I was just in the backyard. It was the hot pink Kemper base. That's all I know the board was. I can never, don't actually know the model, but I know the shape. I know the base off part.
I could tell you what it is from the base and the shape. So the base was pink and blue with white Kemper letters.
100%.
And then was the nose pointy or rounded and pointy?
It wasn't like a jagged point on it. It had a little bit of round into it.
And then the tail, was it rounded or was it more blocky and square?
It would be blocky and square.
It was probably a 150 Kemper Rampage.
Okay.
Yeah.
I vibe on that so much.
I love those
remember,
boards.
It was like, it even came with like Burton Air bindings.
Yep. Direct mounted with screws, like house screws, like wood screws.
And it was like, it was one of those scenarios where it's like, you know, duct tape Sorels for stiffness.
Awesome.
Like I'm old enough, like I was born in 82. So I missed the first rush in snowboarding, but I was able to pick up everyone's leftovers. When the industry died, I was there to pick it up.
So it wasn't like a current board. There was like, at that point, there was like, you know, what would that have been? If you're born in 82, you're about 10 years old?
Yeah, I think it might have been even like 11. Like I was pretty late to the game. So
so it's an old board at that time, right? Yeah. But it's still like a functioning, like you could actually learn to snowboard on it.
Honestly, people were like, well, like, you know, what brought you to like wanting to snowboard? I used to love sliding on the hill, and my move was like to stand up and surf on like the toboggans, whatever it was. I'm like challenging myself to that. So as soon as I got on the board and stood sideways, I'm like, I'm so familiar with this. Like, I grew up in like the only boy in a family. There were 6 sisters, so I was like,
crap.
Play outside by myself kind of guy. Yeah. So like also a little bit of like, people who grew up in big families have this little tendency to show off a little bit to gain attention.
Yeah, of course.
And that was my move. So
that's so sick. So when's the first time you go to a ski resort? Like, is this a little bit later, or do you ride the Kemper at like? No.
So back then boards were still banned on the hills there, but I was able to I went for one day. They had the schools had what we called options back then, where you take a day off from school, you learn a different sport. And they actually had this one option where like, hey, anyone with prior ski experience, we have a ski jumping course.
Shit, like, dude.
Thunder Bay was known for their ski jumping classes. And I was like, you know what? Like, they're not going to check my prerequisites. Like, they already know I'm like a little bit of a wild child. So signed up for ski jumping, showed up. They had the skis and the gear, everything. And I'm like, God, I've got no fucking idea what I'm doing. And it was like, it was kind of funny in a sense too, because like we did the day there, but at the end of the day, I'm like, hey, this little jump's like tiny, like I can do this. I'm looking at this next size jump up beside us, and I was like, I told my coach, I'm like, I want to hit that. He goes, no, there's no way you're gonna hit that. And later on in life, like a couple of years ago, when I watched that movie, like Eddie the Eagle, whatever it was, where he like steps up and goes and crashes.
Yes.
That literally could have been a playback of my entire life, because like coach comes back after taking a washroom break. I'm at the bottom of the second jump, like crippled, broken collarbone, like out.
Like actually hurt.
Total liability. Like the mountain was panicking. It was called like Big Thunder ski resort. And they were like, oh my God, it's like, we brought this cool kid up. He's absolutely murdered himself at the bottom of this jump.
What happened to this kid? What were you doing? The guy's like, I was in the bathroom. Oh my God.
So that was like my one and only experience in school of going out and riding and skiing. But that got me onto the hill. As soon as I was like, you know, out of that school age, I was like, okay, like board on. Yeah. I ended up saving enough money to grab like a little GNU Dukester.
Perfect board. What a great board. Yeah.
And that was like, that started my love of like, I know GNU was separate back then, but like my love of like connecting with Mervyn all began then.
Of course. Yeah. There's a feeling of family at Mervyn that it's real, because Pete and Mike have always been Mervyn the whole time. And when those, like even the ads for those Dukesters, Skidders, like the boards were just, it was nonsense, but it was fun, you know? And I think that I don't know, I haven't paid attention to Mervyn lately, but I think that they've constantly been pretty true to the like quirky, neat, arty vibe.
Yeah, I've always just seen that company and other companies like that is just like loyal to the core of what we are. Yeah, it's like the reason why I wasn't a skier or any of that choice is because like I like self-expression. Like if you're a skier, there's a certain way to do things. There's like, you must do this. This is your form. And I was like, I'm out. And like Mervyn's always kind of had that attitude where like, keep it fun, keep it quirky, like just like how you mentioned. But it's like the people who support GNU and LibTech are like, they're lifers, and there's a reason behind that. And I don't know. I often attract myself to people that are core to the sport, like yourself. So,
thanks for saying that. Yeah, I have what I would call an imposter syndrome in that. Especially lately, I've been comparing myself a lot to, the bomb hole, and Jody Wachniak just went on there. He's the airtime guy, but on some level, it feeds this idea that, well, Jody's really core. He's a part of the real community. Bomb hole's really the thing. I'm over here, being this guy that's looking and a super fan of it while not being in it. But then there are other times where I'm like riding Whistler with Ken Achenbach, or I'm riding down in Bear Valley with Blaze Rosenthal and Corey Smith, that I'm like, or Chris Roach, like I'm going, okay, I am in it. For sure I'm in it, for sure. And I think that the core does actually include a community of misfits from the beginning. And then anybody now that falls in love with snowboarding, that, no matter where they're from. Yeah, I mean, obviously the theme of imposter syndrome is going to probably play into your story a little bit here. Maybe we even just go straight from the beginning, because before you were with your adopted family in Thunder Bay, you spent 3 years with your birth mom.
Yeah.
Do you remember any of that stuff?
I do, funny enough, where it's just like bits and pieces, of course, but exactly like you said, I want to recognize what you said about your own imposter syndrome first of all, right? Too, because it's like I want to validate you as someone like you are in this community, and you're a vital part of it. So I get that, and I have to even like remind myself, and like it's good to hear from other people as well too, because that's the way I grew up. Like I grew up originally with my First Nations mom. I come from two parents from the Lac to Mille Lacs First Nation, which is just west of Thunder Bay. And at the age of 3, I was taken away, which was part of, in Canada, we called a 60 scoop, which was a government mandate to move Indigenous kids a minimum of 100 kilometers away from their homes into Christian-based homes. Even if like my aunts and my uncles, my grandparents at the time were like, we'll take them, no problem. They're like, no, sorry, we've already selected a family, so on and so forth. So in growing up, I was an Indigenous kid growing up in possibly one of the most whitest places in Canada, being Thunder Bay. And like, I never quite fit in with the kids in school. Also, after years of growing up within my new adopted family, I never felt even kind of like lightly welcomed back into the First Nation communities until much later in my life, once I reconnected and realized what was really missing with myself.
Right, of course. And so the 60s scoop happened, I guess the legislation was written in the 60s. Yeah. I'd like to address that it's like it's completely transparent what the goal was.
Yeah.
And there's a saying in Canada that's old, kill the Indian, save the man, which was, it's horrible. We could just let that sit there for a second. It was an attempted and fairly successful genocide of hundreds of nations of people across a huge swath of country.
Oh, they tried their damnedest to eliminate our bloodlines from existence. Like my grandparents, I've got two sets from my great grandparents. They attended residential school. My grandparents attended residential school, which is like full time. At the age of 4 to the age of 14 to 16, they were taken away into these Christian institutions where they weren't allowed to hug or show affection to each other. They got in trouble for using their language. There was a whole bunch of things that came out of it with systemic abuse. In the particular residential schools that my grandmother was in, they actually got caught for doing hunger experiments where they, just would starve the kids and see what would happen, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, they tried their darndest. My parents were then, after the residential school system closed, my parents were in what's called the Indian day school system. So it's like basically the same thing, but at the end of the day, the kids still got to go home. But they're going home to broken households because their parents, didn't know how to look comfortably into another person's eyes.
Right.
They didn't know the verbiages of "I love you" or the value of touch. So there was a lot of coldness and like a lot of trauma that was really brought up with that because the former generation hadn't been able to heal. So you have a lot of alcoholism and different things that were stemmed from that. And then going forward, and it's into my generation, it was like, it is called the 60 scoop, but it's really valuable to understand that the whole name needs to be changed because it's like it went from the 1960s until 1992. Oh. So it's like, how about the 60s and 90s scoop? Whatever it is, there's now more Indigenous kids in foster care and social system scenarios than there ever has been in history.
Right. And what do we use the word scoop for? Like a scoop of ice cream. Like it's a kind of a positive thing. It should just be like the stealing of Indigenous children from the community to assimilate them into Christian society because that was the goal. The goal was to end the Indigenous knowledge and way of life, including language, culture, and like things were made completely illegal.
Absolutely.
Right? And these things, so as it was, people made the prediction in your community that this knowledge will prevail. It's going to take a few generations, but the idea is that people like me who grew up with white parents that are in a white system are going to start to ask, what was the other way before, right? Mm-hmm. And so we're at a point where that's a difficult question to ask because first of all, the other way before was made illegal by my culture years and years ago. And so now it just makes sense that your culture would have a difficult time having me come and go, you know what, I don't want them to cut down the rainforest anymore. Is there some sort of spirit name you could give me? There's a lot of like really good intention but bad actors in the place where I'm at even, right? Where I'm like, I'd like to give a voice to Indigenous culture. But first, let's make sure that you're good, right? Like, because your story it has a lot of trauma in it and that you want to tell it, right? Like, so this isn't I wasn't coming at you going, oh, this is going to be the scoop. I got the scoop. I got this guy. This was like, I respect you for your place in the community. Mm-hmm. And then when you started to generously share your story with me, I was like, wow, this is something that people can benefit from hearing. Because sometimes people will ask me, why do you wear the headband? Are you Indigenous? I'm like, not at all, right? Mm-hmm. So when I got my haircut, I stopped a little bit just out of respect for not doing cultural appropriation. I mean, my headband thing started with West Beach. They did a bright neon headband. And then it became a security blanket for me. I like to have a headband on. I just became headband guy.
And you look great with it. And I'm going to tell all the listeners right now, cultural appropriation isn't not being able to support like wearing Indigenous art, beadwork, headbands. We want that as our community wants to see our culture on everyone. It's where you find that beadwork. Like, oh, I got this Mary Lou Schmidt from down the road made me some beadwork. Looks kind of Indigenous. Love it. that's taking our culture and supporting someone outside of our culture. And that's really where the problem is. If you got authentic gear, like the dope headband you have on right now that
that you made, and thank you very, very much.
You're welcome.
Amazing.
I was just like fluff myself there on that
Yeah.
one. But,
well, by the way, it took like over a year. I think I asked you very willy-nilly. I'm like, hey, man, that looks great. I'd like one. And you were like, no, I don't have the energy for that right now, which was also a kindness that you showed me in being honest. A lot of times people, especially in our new normal, will just ghost when there's something uncomfortable coming up. But you were very honest about it. And to get it, I wasn't expecting it. And it became this huge thing for me that I was like, oh my God. I showed my wife and she's like, are you shitting me right now? Like, look what he's making. This is incredible. So yes, thank you for that.
And that's where I love to now create. When I first started doing beadwork, like probably only just 2 years ago, it was my self-care. So it was like, when I get off, as we'll probably get into, I do so much random shit within our industry and outside of it that when I got home, I'm like, I needed something to either unwind, but my mind was always so busy. And I really found comfort and almost a reconnection to my own culture in doing beadwork. Then it turned into a business. People wanted it. People loved it. I was starting selling pieces to TV shows. And then I was like, whoa, break, pull back. Like, then I just stopped doing it altogether for a while, just to kind of bring my love back for it now. And now all I do is I create pieces for my friends, people that I care about in the industry that, have done good for me. And now my love is fallen back with it. So
that's right.
I'm creating more and more each day and having more fun with it.
So I've spoken on the show quite a bit about Clarence Mills, who's a master totem pole carver from Haida Gwaii. And when he was first explaining to me about his being a master carver, he gave me, a few books about Haida, and he told me the way that traditional Haida carving happened was that the chief would choose an artist, and then the artist would move in with the chief and his family and live there. The art comes when he's inspired. So like what you're talking about with the beadwork, it's like there's an excitement about the fact that, this is kind of viable and I might be able to do this as a side hustle. That's the white culture part. The true artist part, which is as art is just a human expression. That part is like telling you, hey, authentically, I didn't get into this to make the money thing.
100%.
Is that what
I totally vibe with that because it's kind of like the artist in residency from back in the day of the system. But if you don't have that connection to the person that you're creating for, it feels like a one-sided. You can create art from one side, but the inspiration that you take from the art, like for instance, I simply said, hey, like give me like 3 colors, like point me in a direction that your mind or your heart is sitting at, and I'll take it from there. And that was like, those interactions are so vital to the creation process. And not having a timeline, I was like, hey, you might never get this, but I'm going to take these colors, I'm going to listen, and when I have an inspiration to do it, I'll knock it out.
So rad.
It was probably like 2 hours later. I'm like, fuck it, let's do this.
That was so amazing. For me to see it, it was just incredible. It just warmed my heart for sure. And you're reminding me of Kaz, who did the art for this board, and also did a really cool graphic for a custom board I did with Wired last year. He asked me the same 3 questions. He asked me for 3 colors, and he asked me for a couple of things, feelings and stories about. And look at all the signatures on this. This is insane.
I know. We're using a poster right now for the users that can't see it right now. But a poster covering up some of the infiltrating light, and it keeps popping off the window. So we're just going to flow with it today.
Every single signature from Natural Selection last year.
Yeah,
or is it every single?
It's every person with exception to all of the awesome leaders that made it happen, like Liam and T-Bird and Carter and the whole crew himself. Like I met so many wonderful people working with Natural Selection over the last 2 years that I feel very blessed. And not only that, it gave me an inlet into more of the industry that I'm starting to specialize in.
It's incredible that you got there. So getting to your life story, you grow up with your mom for 3 years.
Yep.
So you get the real connection to your birth mother, which is, I think that's pretty crucial for development of a human being.
Yes.
I didn't make that up. That seems like that's what
it's kind of is what it is. It's like, what did they say? Like, you can usually tune any child into the man or the woman or person they want to be if you can control them up to the age of 7. Well, I had almost like a 50-50 split of development in between like my First Nation side and then my new non-Indigenous side that I grew up on. So that's where a lot of the imposter syndrome developed. But unknowingly, these wounds and things that happened when I was younger transition now into creating something where I'm able to turn wounds into wisdom. And now I live between both worlds, and now I'm comfortable working with First Nations communities, working with the non-Indigenous peoples. And really that's the strength in what I do nowadays is bonding communities and helping them communicate and work better together.
a connector.
Yeah,
that's so dope, dude.
I guess that's what it is. Yeah, I'm just an in between.
So what age do you move to Whistler at?
I moved to Whistler when I was 20.
So, and tragically, your mom passes away when you're quite young, right?
She unfortunately she was murdered probably, and sorry, just to kind of throw that there for any listeners that
we'll put a trigger warning.
Yeah,
at
a little
the
trigger warning at the
this.
very beginning there. That's good. I'm okay with it. I've done a lot of therapy, and there's been a lot of spiritual blessings that have come from it. But my mother was tragically murdered in Thunder Bay in 2018. So it was actually somewhat recently.
Yeah, that's recent.
But also, it's if anyone knows Thunder Bay, it has a plethora of uninvestigated police reports when it comes to any kind of murdered or missing Indigenous women. My mother just happened to be, unfortunately, one of those extra statistics. When she passed, we had to fight so hard for the police simply just to investigate a little bit of it, where we're like, okay, like what's happening? And they're like, oh, like no one's investigating, no one's happening. They're like, there's a point in time in her life where she was living on the streets and working the streets. So then in their minds, she was just another First Nations woman from the streets. They ended up doing an investigation too at that point where they turned the paperwork back, said, hey, we investigated it. We did an autopsy. My sister gave them permission for that. And they go, the results are in. We didn't find any drugs in her system. And I was like, what? That's your investigation? Like, my mother was like beaten and left for dead in her room, and you just tested her to make sure she wasn't on drugs?
Wow.
So that's basically where it was left off. We pushed and like received a redacted report from the police on the final report, where it was just like, it was a page of black lines because most of it was removed from discussion. But it was a very angry state of my life, because me and my sisters, we had a journal. We know exactly who this person was who did it.
Oh.
All of this, like when we showed the police, and they're like, nope, doesn't matter, not investigated. Until this day, this person still hasn't heard like a wink from the police. So that was like one of those turning points in your life where you're like, you know what, like people don't know how much violence it takes to be this kind sometimes, but it's like that in that moment there was like, hey, do I go rogue? And in this point of time, there was this overwhelming feeling, and this is where I really knew my mom was with me, where it's just like, no, this is not what I did. My mom, all throughout growing up, we stayed in connection with my mom, which was like one of the biggest blessings, even after I was taken away, and like not even knowing the hardships that she had been through in life, she always had the biggest smile on her face. And like that's the vibe that I carry forward. And that's after she passed, I started becoming, I would say, like mysteriously lucky, but that's the only way I can really explain it, because I feel like I was like, like I may have lost you in this world, but now I've gained you in my world, where she's always with me. And like, yeah, that's a vibe that was incredibly tragic and is full of anger. And it just transitioned into like, hey, what do I do with this energy? And it really transitioned to like, hey, now let's do more with helping kids. Let's do more with everything to do with my culture. Let's heal this freaking world so no one has to go through the stuff that my mother and grandparents had to go through and other kids' parents have to go through. It's like, let's end these final generations of pain with a round of healing.
Right, right. So, I mean, this is, such a big part of your life, and thank you for sharing it with us.
You're very welcome.
And it's actually a very big part of Indigenous culture across Canada. And so thank you for helping people understand that this isn't just, they're drunk, they're on drugs, they're marginalized systematically. People that are victims of just the most incredible trauma are not getting sympathy on the street. They're getting looked down upon.
And
right?
like, it's one of those cliches too, where it was a learning experience for myself, because you always hear like, you never really know what people are going through. You can never really judge them when you see people going through, there's different scenarios. And that was like a later lesson that really was impactful for my mom, because like I mentioned, whenever I saw my mom, she always wore bright red lipstick. That was like one thing me and my sisters always remember. Because I was actually adopted with two other of my sisters. So I had some biological connections with my adopted family, but she always smiled. We knew that like she'd go through like rounds of drinking, and I was like, okay, she's, something's wrong with mom. And that's how it always was. And it turned to a point where I'm like, she drinks too much. I had to push her away, blah, blah, blah. And we distanced ourselves a bit. And after she passed, there was a really transformative moment where I was talking to my biological dad after I reconnect with him later on in life. And we can get into that later, but he goes, do you even know what your mom's story was? And I was like, barely, because she would never talk about it. I don't know her pain. She goes, your mother's like absolutely one of the most beautiful women I've ever met. And then B, someone who's gone through the most hardships that I've ever even imagined and don't even know how she's still living. How can someone who's been through all of that come up and smile every freaking day? And that was like something for me. And I'm like, that cliche of not knowing what someone's going through and even prejudging them. And we went like, alcoholic, whatever. And then knowing the things that she'd been gone through, I'm like, no shit. Like,
shit.
I would never put the bottle down if that went through me.
Right.
Yeah.
I've actually heard that in the resistance, it's not easy what a person is doing, destroying their body publicly, but resisting. I don't want what you're offering to me. I don't want basic human rights like you're saying, because that's in a system that's completely fucked. I don't want to participate in that. So I'm going to bide my time, and I'm going to get drunk, and I'm going to smile.
Yep. I think that's a lesson that everyone can take forward. Or just like, no one knows.
Don't judge. Yeah.
Sometimes it's like create an opportunity, not just to listen, but like to create those opportunities for healing, and then taking time and then continuing to listen is something that I need to do more of, and that's something that I'm more watchful of these days.
Thank you for sharing that. That's dope. So in your late teens and, when you turn 20, you make a conscious decision to go to Whistler. Is that based upon, I already know because I read the thing, but you chose to try and be happy.
Yeah.
In your situation.
There was a moment, if you're anyone in Thunder Bay, basically the center of the universe at that point is Toronto.
Yes.
So I'm like, all right, like I did like a year of business studies before I dropped out of college because I couldn't maintain life in Thunder Bay. So I went to Toronto and, wore a suit and like did this job with, I think it was like Rogers back in the day, transferring people from landlines to this new other Rogers system, blah, blah, blah. But one day I was just like looking at myself in the mirror and I was wearing this suit and I was like really, really short hair as well too. And I was just like, I don't like this person. I don't like this person. I'm like, I thought about everything in my life. I'm like, I don't really like this. I don't like that. I'm like, well, in a moment of like, just like, I was like, well, whatever made me happy in my life? And it was like It was that twice or multiple times stolen Kemper that I used to ride back in the day, and like that feeling of just like I could do that without anyone else around and be happy. And that was the one thing that I gravitated to. I'm like, okay, that's it. That's like within 2 weeks, I gave away my suits in a poker match with my friends in Toronto, and I Googled which ski resorts had staff housing. So it was like a toss up because I was originally going to go to maybe Canmore, Alberta, but their staff housing wasn't as robust as Whistler's was, and I was like, screw it, we're going to Whistler.
Sick.
And it's never been looking back ever since. I've upon arriving to Whistler, I found community. I found people that were core with the sports. I got wrapped into a really wonderful pod of snowboarders because I taught snowboarding back in the day. It was kind of like the misfits of Blackcomb Mountain. And if anyone's ever knows this area, it's like they push off this little group of this little pod of snowboarders that were like, you couldn't really fire us because we've been around long enough. And most of them are like really core into the industry. But there was like one of my mentors and bosses, his name is, everyone knows him as Ratty, but his name's Aaron Brown, and like just core as core gets. Our trainer back then was Wes Makepeace. If anyone knows Wes Makepeace, like you can never feel insufficient enough when you see that man ollie over something and you're like, well, shit. And like these connections of like just snowboarding, the core people industry is where that all began. That's where I first got to meet Jamie Lynn back in the day, and like
Sick.
just being connected to not just snowboarding, but like, you know, the real snowboarders from yesteryear that were still doing it to today. And like, I was like, this proves to me that I can do this for life.
Rad.
Yeah. And like that just snowballed into, you know, my next evolution of where I took snowboarding.
So what job did you pick when you got to Whistler?
Oh, I was originally just like did anything, like any kind of random snowboard bum, like sales, retail shops, rental shops. But then I really got into, I was just a regular everyday snowboard instructor.
Yeah.
Landscaping in the summer times and construction work in the summer times, just like most people. But when I was working this construction job, later on, I met someone by the name of Justin McCutcheon, and his wife is Chelsea McCutcheon, who is an absolute awesome role model in our Indigenous world. And I was like, Justin, did you tell me that your wife works with a First Nation snowboard team? And he goes, yeah, they're rad. They've been around for like 5 years at that point. They were founded in 2003 by an amazing man by the name of Aaron Marchant. They said, hey, like, I was like, how can I help out? They're like, well, just show up to practice. So I started just like, you know, shadowing this group, and immediately found a home with them. Seeing like Indigenous kids come to the mountain, and then there's Indigenous instructors ran by an Indigenous person. Like this whole world was so foreign to me because there was no snowboarders that were Indigenous when I grew up that I knew of. There's no one in the industry. There was no one in the shops that looked or felt like us. And I found that immediately. So I don't know if it was a trauma response or something that people do, like in my scenario of like, but I kept on saying yes, kept on being like the yes man. So yeah, I eventually ran the Whistler team, and then ran BC, and then ran nationally. And then after several years, and I think I've always forgotten the date by now, but it's like maybe around 2017, I became the executive director of the program. At that point, and we'll do some little background on the First Nation snowboard team. It was created in the precursor to the Olympics. Olympics were going to be in Vancouver, and the Squamish Nation and the Lillooet Nation got together, and that's like the main nations in Vancouver and just west of Whistler, just north of Whistler. They said, well, if we're backing the bid for the games, we want an opportunity for our kids to be on the hill.
Cool.
So it's like, you can't have the games without us, basically. So they started off with 10 kids from the local area. They said, if you guys don't drink, don't do drugs, do well in school, we're not only going to give you a pass, we're going to give you a season's pass. We're going to give you gear. We're going to give you a minimum of 10 days of coaching. And then we're going to give you these pathways to be competitive snowboard. They basically were like, we're going to go and we're going to start sweeping podiums. It was a beautiful model. It snowballed into starting teams all across Canada. The model was working really well. And yeah, it became a home for me. And eventually when I was able to take control and gather support for what I found was more important in the sport, because falling back on my core snowboarding days, I was like, honestly, guys, like looking at the funding model for competition and what we're actually doing here, it's great and all. Like these 2 or 3 kids that are really excelling, it's awesome that we're giving them a platform to be awesome. But I have a sneaky suspicion that even these 2 or 3 kids without the talent they naturally have, they're gonna make it regardless. What are we doing with these other couple hundred kids now that, we're not focusing so highly on? So I was able to successfully convince the board to drop competition and to flip our funding model to help more of the actual youth that needed the help. So that's kind of some background on the First Nation snowboard team before we transitioned.
That's really cool. So when you transition, does that turn into the Indigenous Life Sports Academy at that point?
Yeah. So basically, I always had in mind to do so, but when we dropped competition from our snowboarding model, here's the funny thing where it's like we lost all of our sponsors. So
right
there's and you know what? Fuck it. I can throw them under the bus because they're not even a part of it anymore. But RBC backed out. We don't receive any more federal or provincial funding because we're not a competitive sports team anymore. Wow. So we went from in the upwards of I think they're making $200,000 and to support the kids every year. We dropped down to years where we were doing $30,000 to operate all year round.
Oh,
and
wow.
Having a couple hundred kids in the program. And it was tight. But then we started having this rebirth of other brands starting to support us. We had Jeff from Baldface, and we have these other people stand up and realize what we're doing and the coreness of what we're trying to do. I was like, thank you. When COVID hit, Whistler Blackcomb and all the local mountains, Grouse and Cypress, and we were at 7 resorts at that time. We closed operations early that year because, hills are closed. That was an opportunity where we still had money left in our budgets.
Cool.
And I said, I know exactly what we're spending this on. We're going to take the exact same model that we did so well with snowboarding, and now we're going to do other unstructured non-team sports. So we moved into skateboarding. We now offer skiing. So we're trying to be inclusive on the mountain too.
Yeah.
We do rock climbing, mountain biking. We have cross-country skiing programs. We have opportunities now to do archery and different things where we want to focus on activities and sports where for our community, it's not about the podium or the medal or the coolness. It's about saving kids' lives and really aiding their mental health and having suicide reduction. Because if you're going through shit at home and things are going on, you can go and pick up your skateboard or grab your snowboard or go on your bike or whatever it is. These are the activities that we focus on because they have the highest value and return of lives.
Oh, wow. I don't want to say anything. I want that to sink in. That's just incredible. So this opportunity that you found, and I think at the beginning you mentioned, magical luck or, mysteriously lucky. Well, as you transition into this space, mm-hmm. which is obviously fulfilling, right? Like you're when you're looking at the mirror at the kid with the short hair and the business suit on that's shilling for cold calling people. Do you want to switch from your landline to a blah, blah, blah? That was, you recognize that as the wrong path. Mm-hmm. And as you recognize the right path, it sounds like some pretty impressive stuff. Just, I don't know if it falls on your plate or if you get into it because of coincidences, or if you search it out and go, hey, we could do this.
It's a mixture. I think it comes down to being what we call it, kind of, I guess we would coin as not coin, but use the term trailblazing into a new industry. Since there wasn't anyone else doing what I was doing within the action sports and adventure tourism world, it's if not me, then who? And then I end up being, okay, I'll do this, okay, I'll do that. And really becoming a voice for not only snowboarding, but then I started doing consulting work where we've developed so much trust and rapport with the local First Nations that like the municipality of Whistler started reaching out to me and saying, hey, like we need some, like, what's going on? We need some information. Because I wasn't a member of either of those nations, I was able to offer unbiased communication and support and knowledge about what the inner workings of what these nations are doing and what they truly want, and really started creating my new pathway where it's like my passion of snowboarding and doing the nonprofit. Because there was no one else in the industry doing what I was doing, I started going off on another branch where I'm like, okay, well now I'm technically, I feel like I'm creating this role of being an Indigenous relations specialist for this sport.
Okay, so let's talk a little about our imposter syndrome right here,
Totally.
right? Because you're going to be wrestling with that.
Oh, and I will for the rest of my life.
But then also doing this work and having the trauma that you've gone through, like pushing through that trauma, I could imagine that's pulling you back a lot of the time, going like, why should I help these people understand these people? Mm-hmm. This is a fucking nightmare.
It's yet again, it goes down to like, if it's not me, then who? Like I started getting into, I became a cultural competency trainer for what's called like the Lower Mainland Local Government Association. So basically, if you're around the Vancouver area and you're newly elected to your position as a municipal or city leader, you had to go through training from me to be like, hey, like these are the things to say, not to say. And this is like, basically it was like how not to look like a racist asshole 101.
Right.
So that's another world where it's like, hey, like this, like it's, yet again, it's like no one's doing this. This has to be done. This is only going to help everything that we need to do. And yet again, like I don't feel like this is my role to be doing this. This imposter syndrome is killing me. But yet again, there's no one else doing it.
Right. Well, what you mentioned there too, how not to be a racist 101, which is what you should probably like put on the course outline. Because we're as I'm afraid of being racist accidentally.
Yeah.
And then sometimes I'll get arrogant and go like, hey, I'm one of the good ones. I'm not racist, which is actually the energy that was behind me working with Russell Winfield for The Plug. Mm-hmm. I'm like, Black Lives Matter. People are putting up black squares. I don't want to just do that. I'll reach out to my black friend and invite him to do a whole bunch of work with me, right? I didn't understand what I was even asking at the time. But because I felt like I could arrogantly say, like, I'm not racist, I found out from that process that a racist infrastructure requires no racist people to completely keep going. Mm-hmm. In fact, it's a mechanism of it, is that you live in it thinking, well, I'm not racist. Mm-hmm. But you benefit low key from all these things everywhere you go. And is it racist to benefit from racist things? Eventually. If you don't know, it's not. But once you do,
that's it.
Then yes.
Well, people. Here's one of the things that it's really prevalent in today's age, and I call quite a few people on this. It's the ones that come up and say, well, that was like my grandparents. That was like another generation ago. That was like, it wasn't me. Why is this still a deal? Why do I have to deal with it? This is not my problem. Where it's like, okay, like you're brushing off something like this as not yours, but you're really quick to hold on to everything your grandparents and your parents have built for you in this privileged world. You might not feel like this is like you actively or a part of the destruction or genocide of our people, but in not realizing this is where all of your existence came from here in Canada, and you're not recognizing that's where it's like there's a lot of they need to look hard into the mirror of like, you know, where their privilege actually came from. We do. And I'm speaking on behalf of anyone who's actually asked me that as well. Like, well, I'm not racist. So, and also isn't every culture around the world has been conquered at some time? We won, they lost. Like, can't they get on with it? And that's another thing too that I wanted to quickly point out to you and get me all fired up on this stuff.
Yeah, good.
Is that the fact that this land that we call like the Turtle Island here has never been conquered by war or in specifically where we are in BC, even through written treaty. So it's like we're on what's called unceded territory, which means unsurrendered land. And today we're sitting on the unsurrendered land of the Siginaak Nation. We have other beautiful Indigenous peoples in this local area in Nelson, but this area has never been given away through formal agreement or through surrendering. And it still is prevalent to today. So it's like that conversation, that European mentality of like, oh, things change, things have been different, conquered over. Nah, we've never been conquered. We had agreements all throughout Canada through treaties to say what we're actually doing. And that leads to one of the biggest misconceptions within the Indigenous non-Indigenous world, and where it stems a lot of boiling anger and racism. And so, well, people go, well, that's all my taxpayers' dollars going. I'm not going to throw on some like American accent for some reason. Apparently, that's what my non-biased brain thinks of what racists sound like. Yes. They go, that's all our taxpayers' dollars. They blah, blah, blah. I'm going to let everyone know here to simply just research the First Nations Trust Fund. So I think it was in 1880, or even 1860, possibly before that, there was a deal with the Crown, and that they transitioned the ownership of the land and all the stuff in treaty area, and they developed a trust fund. They sold it, and that trust fund is in the trillions of dollars. So every single education or healthcare things that we traded for the use and the destruction and the pillaging of our resources, all of that money went into a single pot controlled by the Crown, and all that interest that we gain every single year, which is in the billions, is what supports not only our growing support systems, but also has been used for the development of like the CN Railroad and different things that actually created the whole of Canada, where it's like, hey, like not only it's like not a single dollar of your taxpayers has ever gone to us in this sense. We actually helped create Canada unknowingly to your own, to your own missatisfaction.
Wow. Okay, I've never heard that before, and that's incredible.
It's a huge dinger where it's like if you just study this trust fund and understand, and that's where like people probably go missing, and where it's like if you talk about it too much in our world, people are scared to bring it up and question like, hey, excuse me, Crown, like, can we have an audit of our trust?
Right.
Where is this trust?
Right.
There's a lot of rumors spilling around where it's like, was this trust the original bank bailout back in a decade ago? There's a lot of questions where a lot of money has come from in Canada.
Right.
Where the last recession didn't hit us, blah, blah, blah. But like, if you understand the First Nations Trust Fund and did a little digging, it's we could open a deep rabbit hole of scandalous shit.
I feel very confident that the colonization of Canada in particular has this weird trap. It's that Canada tried genocide. They attempted a genocide of many nations of people across the country, but like a complete genocide. But they're a law-abiding. They came over here saying, like, we've got this structure that really works. It's an economic structure. There's laws. There's court systems. There's treaties. There's binding things. And if you've ever been in, like, at an actual court where you're like, hey, officer, I want to say I wasn't speeding. It's very formal. Yeah. The judge just asks you, were you speeding or not? Mm-hmm. And you go, well, I was, but... And then he goes, okay, we're here to decide whether this police officer gave you a speeding ticket lawfully or not. You were speeding. He gave you the ticket. You owe the money. Get the fuck out of here. What are you doing trying to argue that there was, my wife was pregnant or whatever? You can't. It's like the law is the law is the law. So now these treaty laws and unceded land, like, I look to the future going like, this is a giant clusterfuck that is not going to end well for Canada, Britain. Like the land has to go back because it's not ours. Like, so sure, you've been paying the government property taxes but you're paying a government that stole land, taxes on land that they don't own.
And it's like a lot of the people, like a lot of the things that I'm confronted with sometimes where people are like, well, it's like, then we'll just like lose more. People are scared to lose a piece of their pie.
Right.
And if they truly
Right.
understand, and the best way to kind of visualize this, if you include another part of the population, another demographic into this pie, the pie gets fucking bigger. This is one of the things where it's like, one of the examples that I fall back on sometimes to make things more relative to people. And it's not my place as a male to even really speak too deeply on it. But it's like back in the women's rights movements when it's like, hey, like we need more women in the workplace. There was this like same sort of movement where they're like, hey, we need more like BIPOC individuals in the workplace. What happened was there was like, intermingling. We had some, lower level positions given away just to like hit their quota. That was like, since it was like a false agreement and kind of like the intentions weren't ever really to give up their own power, it was like tokenism at its finest. It's like to give them the platform without the power is what's happening today with our Indigenous people. And it's like, it's wild to think that it only really changed in that world when they started mandating that women should have places in boardrooms and in decision-making positions, where it's like, that's when you saw the economy and the revenue and everything. You saw that pie get freaking bigger because finally that demographic was a part of the decision-making, a part of the pie. So like right now, this world of Indigenous people where it's like people are scared to give up their pieces. They're also scared to give up their power. And we're in this interplay right now where it's like, for us, we're like, let our Indigenous people into this decision-making roles. Let us show you that we can do this together. Not only do this together, we're going to thrive together.
Right, right. So there are some very positive things going on in the world, within the economy of Western civilization, that are, they get your attention and they make you feel good. I think, and I'm butchering this, but somewhere on the West Coast in California, the traditional land keepers of that place, the nations that lived there before colonization, acquired like a big slice of a mining tenure. And so they were just going to work within the regular economy. They were going to cut down the trees on it. And then there was a program in place that was like, hey, if you don't cut down the trees, we actually pay you a carbon credit to not cut down the trees. Well, what they did then was they didn't cut down the trees, but they restored the original flow of the rivers so that it wasn't straight, it wasn't fast, and the meandering of the rivers brought back fish, and the fish brought back the wildlife, and the wild forest returned. That to me is like at the core of where we want to be. Like we're facing global climate crises all over the place. Overcrowding at ski resorts is happening everywhere you go. People, burning fossil fuels in just like commuting to work, all these crazy things. So if what we really want is to return to something more natural and more healthful, which you hear a lot of people talking about, healthier food, healthier systems. Well, fuck, there's this great knowledge that Canada spent the last 400 years trying to destroy that was born of living within this ecosystem, that if we can integrate that into what we're doing, right? Like it's not simply about like sharing this pie with more people and because that's just assimilation into this shitty thing, in my opinion. It's also about integrating incredible knowledge of how to live with other people and with other non-human people around the world. Other, like the tree people and the bird people and the fish people. Like that shit's, to me, I'm like, I love that idea. That sounds fucking awesome.
I do too.
Yeah. So I think one of the most inspiring things I saw on your CV was that there was something at Whistler Blackcomb about, what was it? There's you get this Whistler Blackcomb position that's just, to me, learning about it today, I'm like, holy shit, hooray. Like, wow, that's fucking awesome.
Yeah. So this is where my career took a definite like directed approach into where I am today, basically. So precursor to the Olympics, again, we're talking about this pre-Olympic period. In order for the Olympic Committee and the city of Vancouver and everyone to have backing for the bid, they had to get the permission of all the First Nations. A part of this was an opportunity where Whistler Blackcomb at this time, this is before it was Vail, it was under the direction of Doug Forsyth and Dave Brownlee, who are really good, not only allies in our world, but good accomplices as well too. So I got a lot of respect for those two gentlemen. Basically, they created the first ever agreement in Canada, and I'm pretty sure in the States as well too, where it was two First Nations that would often battle it throughout history up to that date. The provincial government in the form of the Mountain Resorts branch, who approved recreational tenures and anything tourism based in BC, and then a private company. So they sat down together and created this 50-year framework called their Master Development Agreement, where it's like, over the next 50 years, this is where we want to go. We want to fully integrate in not only Indigenous culture into what we do every day, but the people. We want to bring back economic value to the nations. We want to create recreational opportunities. If we're doing work on the mountain, we want to have the nations there to do the archaeological assessments and everything that's needed to do with any kind of land-based agreements. This agreement handled. And when they were looking for someone to fill this role, they looked around the industry and it was kind of funny because they were like, at first they asked me to apply because they're like, there's no one in this snowboard ski world currently that has not only your connections to the nations, but knowledge of both sides. And I turned it down first because I was running a successful landscaping company at that time and doing quite well. And then they came back at me and they said, listen, like, we really want you. And they had a member of the nation with us to show the importance. They're like, we want you a part of this because we realize what this could mean for future generations. And I was like, fuck, okay. Like, yet again, going back to like, yes, that yes thing to help other people has always been so deeply and ingrained through whatever my own traumas, whatever it is, the need for help was always there. So I quit the First Nation, I quit my landscaping job, and I started doing community work in the form of the Whistler Blackcomb's new Indigenous Relations Specialist. So over the years, I did that job, and really it was such a great learning experience, and it's really taken me so far in my career where now I have understandings of what resorts look like from the inside when it comes to their consultation and their engagement processes with nations. And now it's even snowballed where I have successfully left that position after just under 7 years in that particular role, just because now I have enough demand where I can do Indigenous relations in this specific specialized role for other resorts and other heli skiing operations and cat skiing operations, where it's like, I knew that my impact was valuable enough, and I saw the growth within the culture at Whistler Blackcomb. We were able to, like, if you saw what Whistler Blackcomb, which I'm sure you did, look like before we started on our project and after, now we have gondolas wrapped in not just First Nations art, but authentic art from like the local people. We have more Indigenous people riding the hill than ever before. We have more workers there. Like Whistler Blackcomb had a couple issues where it's like, in other resorts they used to go to Australia and other places, the UK, to find employees. Well, guess what? Like running up to COVID and different things, they were still like, hey, housing's a huge issue now. What are we going to do? They're like, well, and I was like, in one of the meetings, I'm like, are you guys fucking mental? Like, do you know that there's a population of people just up the road? Let's get them, because they already have housing. Let's bring them to the hill. Let's do this. So this is like, it was an eye-opening experience for myself, knowing that I was able to bridge this gap between the community, but it was eye-opening for them that it was like they had an internal solution other than always looking outwards for their, problem solving.
Right. And then also, so I went to BCIT, and a few of the dudes in my class were from Mount Currie. I got to know them. We went up there a couple of times. One of the things that they were excited about as youth, they were, early 20s guys from Mount Currie. They're like, we've got a plan to develop Mount Currie as our own ski resort. Because fuck Whistler and those guys, which is on our territory, in our land, but we're going to do one, and we're going to do it the way we want, because we want to make that money from that thing. Mm-hmm. I remember looking up Mount Currie going, that shit is steep and gnarly, and that would be insane. But it was, so, I mean, there are people there that felt alienated. They went to school in Whistler, right? If they went off the res to go to school, it was in Whistler.
Yeah.
And then when they'd come back to the res, they were picked on and said, oh, yeah, okay, Shama, like now you're the fucking problem, right?
And that's literally like, that really ties into like my first questions I asked members of our snowboard team at that time when I started the role at Whistler Blackcomb. Like, what does Whistler feel like to you? Does this feel like home? They go, no, this is like so far from what we feel is home. And that became like my mission. Like, okay, this is like beyond like what, the powers that be want me to do in this job. My one key role is to make sure the nation members, first of all, realize that this is their home. This is their territory. This is their fucking land. So that was empowering for me. And that just filled me full of jazz to get it done. But that was something that later on just turned into, and it's funny that you mentioned Mount Currie being so sketchy and gnarly. We're just releasing a movie that's in the film circuit right now. It's called Slides on the Mountain, which is the technical name for Mount Currie. It's Tazil in the Liwat Nation language, but it means slides on the mountain. And we just trained two of our skiers from a very novice level to be good enough to tackle and shred that mountain, the mountain that they look at every single day in their backyard. We now have nation members that have shredded that mountain, and I really vibe on sharing that documentary with the world when we're able to.
That's so rad. Yeah. What a spot. Yeah. We would go up to 16 hot springs when I moved out here. I love hot springs. They're awesome. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's slowly but surely changing to where the nations up there are actually managing the hot springs. It used to be kind of a free-for-all. It used to be a sort of rednecky spot. And now it's a little bit more connected to the nation that's there. It's always been their land, but it didn't feel like that at first. And now it feels like, oh, we're guests here.
Yeah, the Skohomish and the Liwat nations, they have like what they would refer to like in the regular world as a biblical flood stories, where they have like the Squamish have areas on Tantalus Mountain where they show where the old ropes were, where they tied off when the waters raised so high, where at the top of the mountains, like they're like they've been in that area since time immemorial. And that's like what we're seeing now in the resurgence and taking more power back in the management of their lands has only become prevalent, because at first they were just trying to heal. We were just trying to get out of residential school systems, day school systems, 60 scoop systems. But now what we're seeing now is I don't like to use the word empowerment, but like a raising of spirit happening within the nations, that now they're like, okay, like now we're healed enough. Now we're looking we're not trying to look inward enough. We're now looking outside and what we're doing. So now we're seeing, because it's rightfully, they can make decisions for themselves and they can manage their lands, and that cusps on another area that I'm starting to work in now, where it's like currently like how the systems are working with like heli skiing operations and cat skiing operations and ski resorts. It's like they typically go through this provincial system where they have to pay off ministers in the forestry and all these different people along the way in this like red tape, bureaucratic, settler world. And now the reality is that cat skiing operations, heli skiing operations, and ski resorts can work with their local First Nations communities and create land use agreements with the province and circumvent all of this, old system. So it's going to be kind of a battle going for the next 10 years, but we're just starting now where I'm creating almost like another trailblazing career for myself because yet again, if not me, then who? But now it's like, if it comes to, we can have an opportunity to work with all of these lovely operators and people who create these recreational opportunities for our youth to partner even closer with their nations to create better experiences, to have easier land use agreements and everything along the way. And it's like, it's beautiful to see where the world is taking us. And I first thought the provincial government was going to be kind of, standoffish on what we wanted to do. And I proposed, and I've got a close working relationship with the Mountain Resorts branch. And I pulled the executive director aside one time and I'm like, listen, Jen, friend to friend, I see this opportunity to work and be a consultant within the, heli skiing, cat skiing operation world and ski resorts to do exactly this, to circumvent the old ways. I'm like, is this possible? Because tell me straight up before I feel this is real and other people in my world are telling me it's real. I want a systems check. And she goes, absolutely. She goes, and honestly, she goes, if things ever change in my role here, she goes, I would join your team.
Whoa.
So now I was like, okay, imposter syndrome again. So I'm like, oh crap. Like, I'm not a government politician or like any of those people that, can do this right from the get-go. But now I'm like, I have to learn. I need to learn all these systems. And I'm currently every new consulting gig I get is different in the sense, but I'm consistently feeling like it's not my place, but there's no one else doing it.
Amazing. One of the points you said in there that I'd like to address is, so to me, the story I'm telling myself is that you are, a multi-dimensional person with ties in both worlds. Mm-hmm. And when you said, I don't like to use the word empowerment, I like the raising of spirit. The empowerment model, it just in my mind felt like you're talking about, let's empower these poor people that don't have the ways of the smarty guys over here, mm-hmm. as opposed to like, we've been crushing spirit for so fucking long that when you see something like your spirit rising from, your amazing story, like, how could you not be excited about that? Like, that's fucking cool. That's not because somebody gave you an opportunity within this economic system. You're battling with yourself going, is this really possible? And as your spirit is lifted, the challenges become broader and greater and more meaningful to more people, helping more and more people. Whoa, dude. Yeah, wow.
It's a responsibility, but it's almost like it's like, yet again, it's my calling. I don't know what I would be doing. I don't know what I would be doing otherwise. And it's like, that's for nothing. Being a multifaceted person, some people see me as either like, Court, who runs the Indigenous Life Sports Academy. That's like one side of my face. And then there's like Court, who does the, consulting gig. And then also I have like, I now do like stunt acting and my beadwork. And then I shoot compound bow professionally now. Wow, and like, cool. there's so much more to me. And then like these platforms like this, I'm blessed because one thing that I'm really bad at, and I found this out when I was preparing for this podcast, when I was trying to write down the things that I do. I'm like, one of the worst things that I've been bad at in my own career or lifetime is sharing and recording my own successes. And that's something that it raised my spirit immediately. I'm like, hey, wow, like I've been in this industry for over a decade and we're making a really measurable change. Like we have like 3 generations of youth, and now like grandparents on our snowboard team that have been with us since the beginning. And now we have grandparents riding with their kids, like not just like grandparents and parents showing up to clap on the sidelines. We have active participants that are like, we've created generations of healing and continuation and we're just making a big changes in everywhere we go. Like one of the most recent projects here in Nelson was I was working as a consultant with Whitewater Ski Resort, where I helped them name a chairlift. Sometimes people start off and they may have an idea what is a good idea and don't have the right people in the room. Well, they were gonna unfortunately name one of their new chairlifts after a part of the peak that's called the White Queen Peak.
Oh, wow.
Right. Really, really, really close to their Silver King lift. So it branded well for them.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until like I was sitting in prior to a meeting, I overheard them discussing it. And I was just like, you got to be fucking kidding me.
White
to the
Queen.
point where I started laughing.
Yeah.
Which caught their attention. They're like, excuse me, sir. Like, what's so funny? And I was like, in the day and age of reconciliation, to name something not only like after the queen, like, first of all, she just died. She's gone. To name it after like the White Queen, I'm like, you guys, not the right way to do it. So instead of just poking and like adding criticism, I was like, hey, give me 2 weeks. I'll talk to local First Nations. I'll develop an opportunity for us to have some different options.
Yeah.
And then thankfully, Whitewater and the brilliant leaders at Whitewater, Rebecca Hornung in particular, has been a strong supporter of myself and Ilsa. They're full born supported, and their new lift is going to be called the Raven's Chair, with the equal lettering and the language of the local First Nations beside it.
Sick.
Yeah.
Yeah. So moving the needle. Amazing. That's amazing stuff. I mentioned that I'd looked up the Indigenous name of for Mount Seymour, and there's nothing that talks about just the peak, but the Seymour Reservoir translates into pure land is what it was called, which is fun. Like I wanted to put that out there to the listeners that were like, oh wait, he said that. Somebody actually asked me, what was it? And I'm like, it's pure land. So
I love that. And Seymour, first of all, I'm going to drop a plug for Seymour because they've been a partner of Ilsa's and First Nation snowboard teams for 20 years. Cool. And like they're good vibes all around. We had just a meeting with them a month ago, and they were like, how do we do more? Cool. And I was like, that's the vibe. Because it's like, after 2 decades of working and they can see what we've been doing, there's no questions of what we're doing. They're just like, hey, clearly you guys are the leaders in snow sports. We rely on you to tell us what we can do. And we're looking to collaborate in every sense of the word. And like Seymour, Cypress, Grouse, Whistler Blackcomb, Mount Washington. We have crews at Whitewater, Fernie, Golden, and we're expanding into Revelstoke. And like we want to do teams at Red Mountain as well too. And we've started teams in the Yukon and Nova Scotia, Ontario. We've been across Canada in so many ways. We've partnered with 29 different First Nations. We're on track to change this whole freaking world that we sit on simply by getting kids on snowboards.
Jeez, dude. That's rad. How rad is that?
Dude, it's FNRad.
Yeah, I'll tell you, the listeners of this show have supported, like when I've said I'm doing a fundraiser and the money's going to go to the Indigenous Life Sports Academy, people step up. Yeah. So I think, the shortcut to feeling good is to giving to other people, right? We talked about this, the moment that we had where you shared with me about when had you got that leather jacket? Was it around the time that we spoke, or was it way before?
No, it wouldn't have been too much before. It would probably have been 2 years prior to that.
Right. And your grandfather, how did you get the jacket? Just tell the story.
Unbeknownst to me, because like there's a thing in our culture where if you go to like an elder or someone who understands the old ways, and I was simply just like, oh, like grandpa looks fly. Like the Anishnaabe people that I'm a part of, like, have always been like keen in fashion. Like that's where beadwork comes from. This is like, well, primarily like where sweat lodges and things originate. But it's like, I saw my Gramps and I'm like, oh, Gramps is looking fly. Gramps used to like, his name's actually Chief Thunderbird. Like he's a very, very powerful and beautiful human. He'd always modeled himself after like Elvis back in the day. So when I saw like old Chief Thunderbird, he had like swooping awesome hair, and he had this like plush leather jacket with fur came at the top, and I was like, Gramps, look and fly. I really like that jacket. And in saying that, if you were to say like, hey, I like this or like that, they'll give it to you literally off their back. They're like, oh, this is like this is a sign for me to pass this forward to you. And unbeknownst to me, the next time I saw him, he was just like, here you go. This is for you. I was going to give it to you at the time, but I didn't have a jacket to go home with. So I was just almost like, no, Gramps, no, that's not what I meant.
Right.
But it was that understanding of like, the money value, and it's not about that to the former generations. And that was a big learning experience for me. And that was something that we bonded on immediately.
Yeah. And because I was mentioning about this board, like Clarence had it has monetary value, but he gave it to someone else who was Indigenous that gave it to me, which I was like, that I raffled it off, and the guy who won it was like, you know what, that needs to be passed on to the Elsa guys. And then you saw the board and you were like, oh no, I'm in turmoil right now because that board would be sick. I don't have a split. And wow, look at the art, and it's made from Pryor, which is from right here.
Yeah.
Like there was so many things going on. And I casually was like, I think you should have it, because who else is it going to go to? It's not supposed to go to anyone other than someone who wants it. And this is, you just cracked it again for me, is that the wanting of the thing is what makes it valuable. Really, you did want your grandpa's jacket that much. You just didn't know, right? But then also you felt, in my telling of it to myself, you didn't want to take something from him that he wanted, right? That is going to remind him of him, but in the giving to you, now it's got even more dimensions.
It's like spirit gifting.
That's it.
And that's another, and that turns us to this next page of our next evolution, because it usually goes back and forth for, a lifetime between people. And that was like, I know that during our skateboard auction, when we were auctioning off really cool designs, like through Kaz and different ones, you really fell in love with his designs. And right off the bat, I want to say that when you leave here today, you're going home with this Ilsa Kaz Nuhui skateboard, because this was something that you verbally expressed to me that that's rad. I would love one of those if they're ever available.
That's amazing.
Well, guess what? It's available for you.
Dude, it's so crazy. And thank you so much. And thank you for sharing that part of value with me. Like, it really did mean so much more to me after. And I would tell that story about your grandfather and the leather jacket often. And people would be like, yeah, no shit, Sherlock. And I was like, no, but it really embodies that real, like, yeah, it's a completely different economic system. In our economic system, it looks like to me, the more things that you accumulate that make people jealous of you, the better you're doing, the higher up you are. Elon Musk, look at all that money. But in Indigenous communities, it looks to me like the value is in what you can share. So your social status comes from how well you share, as opposed to how well you accumulate.
Yeah. It's that spirit gifting that like ripples through a community. That's like, it's so valuable.
We were told the story in school, and I didn't pay very much attention in school.
Yeah.
But supposedly, Indigenous cultures are oral, right? Like that's something that we talk
100%.
about a lot, the oral history. But in the storytelling on blankets and carved into utensils and everything that's being used, as James Johnson was telling me, the codex of the stories is writing. Right. So we were told, oh, they came over here. These guys couldn't even read or write. Right. And so we're going to give them some culture. Well, if you want to feel cultural, you want to see some cultural heritage, go to the Museum of Anthropology and look at the stolen stuff that's there. And you'll see very quickly very spiritual, connected cultural societies with craftsmen, apprentices, and a deep, deep timeline of learning to do. If you've ever tried to make any kind of art, you look and go, oh, that's kind of nice. Then you try and do it. You're like, oh, fuck, how the fuck would you even do this? So sorry, there's a lot there, but
that's a perfect little segue into something where it's like in the colonial days, and this is something like a lot of like anthropologists and people have like realized, it's like when the colonial forces came around to Africa and different countries, there was almost a lean towards creating, workers, slave people out of these scenarios. What happened was, and this is documented in the first meetings of the people coming to Turtle Island, which what we call North America, is they would see symbols and symbologies that were like almost protected, and like by like people from across the ocean, they're like, how do they know about these things? So instead of turning us into a slave class, that's when the doctrine came down to try to civilize the savage, because they realized that there was something about us that was enlightened enough where it was like stuff that they weren't vitally showing the world, we were already fully aware of. So there was a big difference in why we didn't become a slave class.
Well, even the term Turtle Island, you can see the turtle shape of North America, but you have to look at it from space.
Yeah.
So that implies a knowledge of either a lucky coincidence.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Or
for sure.
a circumnavigational knowledge, or a view from space somehow.
Absolutely. And that's like in our Anishnaabe culture, every culture has their own unique origin stories, but ours in particular is that we came from just below the 3 stars in Orion's belt, which later on they found is like in this area called M42, which is like in the Orion Nebula there, where it's like the birthplace of stars. We came here on a ship powered by thought and just as quickly. And that's kind of like a secret kind of origin story of our Anishinaabe people.
Do we want to cut that from the show, or we want to put that out there in the world?
It's they tried to eliminate us, and that story would have been gone if I didn't have a chance to live and exist.
Right. And hopefully someone out there that even if it reaches a person that's struggling with their own indigenous spirit, if their spirit is low and this picks it up, like, holy shit, Court's on this thing, let's check that out. And then they're like, holy fuck, I want to learn about my nation's origin story. Go do it. Like,
absolutely. And we're just like, it's just
cool thing.
Every culture, no matter what they are, it's like there's knowledge and knowing of themselves, and where it's like different connections of like this power of thought and how you can transition. And even like modern day cinema, you see these different things. Like, you ever see like the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
Yeah.
Like, well, what's the answer to the universe? Well, what was that? What was that star cluster called just below the Orion's belt? M42. So the answer of the universe was 42. So if you understand all of that, there's like, they leave little sticks throughout, and it really empowered me to go, like, our stories aren't just a story. There's some connection here to the whole entire human experience.
Big time. I've been exploring that theme and nobody's stories are just stories, right? Mm-hmm. Like, so I've always been stoked that when I would learn indigenous stories, Nanabush was something that was happening around where I was.
Yep. That's from my culture as well too, the little trickster.
Yeah, because I'm actually from, where your people were living for so long, like Northern Ontario, Aurelia, and also now, tragically, the largest collection of Superfund sites in the world, which is like places that will require millions or billions of dollars to restore. So they just kind of, what are they going to do? Put a dome over it or whatever. Like the site of probably the worst destruction that humanity's ever caused is in the same spot that your people are from and where I was born. But the Nanabush stories always had like this crazy wisdom of like, if you do this, then this will happen. It's tempting to do this, but then this will happen. Or the Wendigo. The Wendigo was greedy. So if you are greedy, the Wendigo will come and eat you. You know, you'll actually be devoured by your greed. These all seem super cool. And then I'm going, what the hell are our stories? Cinderella? It's like a teenager who thinks she has no clothes. She's always in rags and she has to do all the housework. Jack and the Beanstalk, that was the one where it got me. I'm like, hooray for Jack, the little murderous thief boy. And on its surface, it's kind of like colonizer mentality. You can have anything you want.
Yeah.
Period. You can murder and steal, actually.
Yeah.
Like, be like Jack. But really, it's an ancient story, and it's very old, and it's a simple retelling of the call to adventure. So it's these stories from that perspective. The Nanabush stuff takes on another dimension. The stories of the magic of the animals and of the creatures that were here before us. They're so deep when they're not simple, which is the art is the same. It seems simple, but it's so deep and it's so wonderful to see it with a new breath of spirit in it with your generation.
And like another, like, from our perspective and like what actually happened in history, like those stories were really valuable in the mentality of like how Canada was even in the States were even populated to begin with, because like this, like, you must like, you know, they're starving, doing things in Europe and at this time. And what they did was they offered, okay, if you tackle this giant feat of going across the ocean, finding this land, there was something that was called, and it was in place for it had been over a century, but it was called the Doctrine of Discovery. The Doctrine of Discovery was just reenacted this year. And this basically, this Doctrine of Discovery is basically like, as a European and Christian-based settler, or the places that they came from that were Christian-based, they said, you have the power of God, and this is your right to find land, and any land that you look around on that is not currently settled by another nation is yours to take. So that's the majority of how a lot of Canada was settled, because at this exact same time within our pre-Canadian history, we had what was called the original reserve system were formed, and all the First Nations in the area were told that they had to stay on the reserve. If you wanted to leave for hunting, to visit anyone, you had to get a letter from their Indian agent stating where they're going, exactly when they'll be back, so on and so forth, with heavy repercussions from the military forces at that time. But what that caused is that European settlers would show up and they can just walk around and say, hey, there's no one here, so now this is mine. So because we were trapped on this reserve system with the first passport system. It was like an early COVID system where we needed like passes and approvals and systems to leave. This whole scenario, that was the mentality of like, hey, like we're doing this for the greater good. This is God's purpose. We're only doing this because we were starving before. This is our destiny. So that mentality is like to really understand how most of Canada was settled was because of the fact that we were forced outside of our own lands and into these tiny places and told not to leave, or we would have been thrown in jail or much, much worse.
Right. And told not to speak your language or practice or wear traditional clothing or practice any of the ceremonies like that. Those were made like against the law. So you could be fined. You probably get murdered back in the beginning. Yeah, I couldn't even imagine what Thunder Bay area was like prior to like written or recorded history. Right. Well, holy smokes! It's a big story, but it's starting for the first time to turn around a bit. With stuff like, and you're right at the tip of the spear of that.
And that's where a lot of the people were, is like, we've had prophecies within our own Anishinaabe culture where it's like, we saw not only the turmoil that our people went through, but also the time where things would change. And we have a prophecy, and the users, you can look this up. It's called the prophecy of the eighth fire. And it's basically like, all these generations since colonial contact have been affected and hurt and they're almost destroyed, but it's going to be like the eighth generations that come out of this that are just going to be like on fire. We're going to take the world by storm. There's going to be, in our prophecies, there's going to be a turning time where it's going to become so dire and people are going to like lose their ways and how they're getting food or whatever the ways that they're living spiritually. And then there's going to be an option that the world's given, and they're going to look towards us, and they have an option to join us in what we're doing or to look away. One choice will lead to the disaster of the world, and the other will lead to our healing. And that was we have had these prophecies for over a century. So it's like, we're well aware that this is our opportunity to thrive and to turn surviving into thriving, so everyone could look towards us not as a burden, but as an opportunity for hope.
That's amazing, dude. Are you familiar with like Graham Clark's writings at all?
Not yet.
Okay, yeah, he's kind of the forefront of like quirky geography and like Egyptology, that kind of stuff. But he's arguing that the narrative that we've had people on Turtle Island or North America for, I think what we've been taught in school is 7,000 years or something, 5,000 years, something silly.
Just ignore that crap.
Right. So he's on the other side saying there is way too much information here showing us that that's definitely not the story.
Yeah.
That's not what's happening. So his theory is that during the flood, there were cultures and cultural centers of millions and millions of people, and that they may have had technologies at where we're at or beyond, because they would have been wiped off the face of the earth with this giant flood situation that didn't happen over the course of years or months, but actually hours and days. It went from the top of North America, washed across, and you can see geological remnants of and evidence of it happening. And so what could have happened in that situation, what he postulates, is that hunter-gatherers were living alongside these city dwellers, and the survivors, if they were city dwellers, they didn't have any skills.
Yep.
They were gone.
Yeah.
And if unless they joined in with existing hunter-gatherer societies at that time, then all of the people in North America would have been wiped out, but they weren't. So that the descendants of the joining of like a technologically advanced civilization of First Nations, because we see that, like, look at the beautiful art, look at the Mayan calendar, look at the what's actually physically here. So then I think that makes a lot of sense. It seems like what we're seeing isn't the very first time that these societies popped up. And then obviously Canada coming across and wiping out this second, third, 10th, 500th iteration of this ebb and flow of lots of people, disaster, right?
Absolutely. And we've done a lot of like work with other Indigenous cultures all throughout Turtle Island here, and like there seems to be, and it's proven now, there's multiple migration points that happened within the land here, and like the land-based bridge theory has been nearly just thrown out the window because how ridiculous it is. But I can speak for ourselves, where we were originally, we came from the southern area and we went up the East Coast, and we were primarily on the East Coast. And they said it was approximately about, and this is from oral tradition, so I'm just going to, I hope I don't missay this at all, but it's about 4 to 5 years prior to Columbus and team arriving on the East Coast. The medicine man and shaman had visions of, at first there was, they would see this vision of just like circles and flow through forms coming across the ocean. And then they started seeing visions of these almost like square, blocky forms. And from their mind was like, there's a very masculine powerful force that was coming towards us. And they predicted it would be here within like several years. So what our people did was that in order to survive this oncoming genocide that our shaman have seen, we must move west. And the key to where people in our Anishinaabe culture, where it's like, we are told to move west to where eventually we find where food grows on water. So our people, you'll find our Anishinaabe people scattered from the East Coast into Quebec, all throughout Minnesota and in Ontario, and even as far as like going towards like the plains and to Alberta, our people went. But a lot of people say that the area that we found were the very far western area of the Great Lakes, where there was wild rice that would grow on the waters, and particularly like, where our areas were from. And a lot of people said, no, this can't be it. And they continued further. So there was a lot of loss of our culture just in that period alone. But it's if you look at the modern treaty maps and everything, like that assimilation that happened from East Coast to West Coast, if we stayed on the East Coast to where we were, we would have almost lost everything. We had to hide our knowledge, and our medicine people were based on Manitoulin Island, where you spent time as a young one. That's like the secret home to our Meadowin water drums and these beautiful, beautiful pieces of our culture that we hid from these oncoming onslaught from the East. And where we resided just west of Thunder Bay is where like the treaty zones have fallen apart, and we were able to retain our culture, and the prophecies rang true to us.
That's so awesome, dude. Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. I've read some of that in Braiding Sweetgrass, the Robin Wall Kimmerer book. And when the word Manitoulin came up, I was like, honey, that's where my wife grew up. Mm-hmm. She was born and raised there and has family there. And it's interesting to see, because I can see both sides now too. Like the white culture that's been there for several generations, are indigenous to that place. I don't want to use that word, that's wrong, mm-hmm. but they're from that place. So you see their grip on their, rights-based. We have rights based around being here for so long, which is in direct conflict with, well, if you're going to recognize rights of people that have been here for the longest amount of time, or if being here longer means more rights to the place, then that's why it's called First Nations, the First Nations of this.
And that term actually became relevant because I think it was in 1992, the Anishinaabe Nation itself banned the word Aboriginal. Mm-hmm. Aboriginal is still used in forms of government and other nations that haven't uplifted their spirit enough to use something different. But we had our own people go to school, and they realized, okay, wait, hold up. Like we've learned your English, and the term abnormal means not normal. So the term Aboriginal means not original. We're like, yo, fuck you. Guess what? Because let's use your own words against us. We would like you to know that we are called First Nations. We're not originals. We are the originals here.
Sick.
So that's where you'll see this flow. And I've been responsible in helping, I think, like Canada Snowboard. They used to have an Aboriginal snowboarding program, and it's like a couple hot emails later, they now have an Indigenous snowboard program. And
right.
And bless their hearts, I really love Dustin Heiss and everyone at Canada Snowboard. They've always been good supporters of us, but they listened, and they made a step in the right direction, because these different terms are only still holding us back.
Right. Yeah, the idea that colonizers, let's just call, like the last peoples, right? Like the last people to get here. That's how it should feel, is that imagine going to your friend's house, they live there, and then you show up and you say, can I stay here? And they go, I guess. And then you go, can I have all my friends come over and stay here too?
Yeah.
And then also, could you move out?
Yeah.
And could I stay here forever? And also, when you move out, could you like just not exist as well? Like, could we just kill you? Would that be okay?
Yeah.
Like, so a lot of times the argument on the other side that we were vocalizing before, of someone saying, get over it. This is, if you're going to play fair, which is what I was saying about all the treaties and all the lawful stuff that the colonizers have done, when you start to call it into play, like the fund that you were talking about, because when you zoom out, it's like, we don't own this, but anytime we make a profit from it, some of it has to go to the original owners. Now, we'll keep that safe over here in a bank for you because you wouldn't want to keep that under a rock or something. But, okay, I'd like to see my bank account, please. And if, like what you're saying, if it's in trillions of dollars, and people get scared, like, well, where am I going to live? It's like, hey, guess what? Guess who felt like that a few generations ago?
Even still, too, people are like, there's that mentality, right? Oh, well, the money's going to go to like something else. Well, guess what? You guys have already been paying the crown for how many fucking years,
right?
And centuries, where it's like you've been supporting another country and other people that have, your best interest is not in theirs.
Yes. I Googled richest landowners in the world. King Charles is number one.
Yeah.
That's fucked up.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have guessed that. I don't even know who I would have guessed. I don't know. It just seems, it's so far off my radar because it's not really like, how would you measure things? Ooh, the more land you own, the more you owe to the world. Like you're the more tyrannical you actually are if you're not sharing it with other people.
Yeah, that's a whole nother rabbit hole. I hope I don't end up in another job role where I'm trying to manage that. But
right. So your love for snowboarding, and Jeff Pensero said yesterday, he's also actually a very fucking talented snowboarder, which is dope. What is a typical season look like for you these days?
These days, okay, honestly, like for the course of me doing the nonprofit and the other work for Whistler, I was like almost like stuck in my little Whistler bubble, as many are. I didn't get out very much. I still do like I do like 80 plus days a year on my snowboard, which is like lot. Prime time for most people. Yeah. But it's like the I wasn't able to do backcountry trips, all these cool side things because I was so busy. I was like, I can't plan for any of that. But now in the growth of our team and the rebuilding of who we are today as the Indigenous Life Sports Academy, and now me officially leaving Whistler Blackcomb and freelancing, now I have nowhere near the funds I used to have working for a salary job. And you get this because you quit your 100% quit that, corporate job to do what was passionate for you. But when now that's opened up for me is that I've got a great team in Whistler. I've moved to Nelson to grow our Kootenai expansion program. And how my winters look now is that I get to ride, I get to try new mountains. Sick. We've had relationships with mountains all throughout Canada, but I've never been able to participate it with do it myself. So my love of snowboarding, damn, it's gone off. Like I'm not much of a rail rider anymore. I'm in my early 40s, but like I'm side hits. Like I'm following the footsteps of the West Makepieces and the people that I look up to most, from looking at how their career and how they stayed in the career for life, and the Jamies and I would just love to just do it for the rest of my life and continue having fun. I just want to shred.
Sick.
I did my first ever heli boarding. I did one lap 2 years ago. I did my first ever cat trip last year, like in the beginning of last year, and like I'm now able to participate in the sport with everyone else, and I'm looking forward to trying new places and trying new boards and just having fun. Like we're all supposed to be having fun.
Yeah, that's so sick, dude.
I was worrying about everyone else, and now it's like. I mentioned before that I was always kind of a yes man. Yeah. Well, now I'm a solid maybe bro. So, which is now it's opened up space in my life for these adventures where I can now I can go to natural selection tour, help them with the tour, and then shred Revelstoke with the rest of the crew. And now it's opened up to I was just lucky enough to be invited to Culture Shifters this last spring with Salema. and Zeb and the Burton and Red Bull crew. And basically we compiled, I think there was like 140 Black and Indigenous and Asian participants in our sport that all got together just to be like a takeover. And it was the first time. And like we went to like the whitest place on earth. We went to Aspen, Colorado, which was like, I was like, at first I was like, okay, is this a trick? Like I'm going to end up like in a jail cell or, you know, worse. But it was like the most beautiful takeover where it was like, I had time now to go participate and meet other people in our sport and make lifelong connections with people that have been doing it forever. And like, you know, like the Stevie Bells and like these people that were like pioneering for their own culture back in the day. We all found a sense of community together, and now we're working together, and we're hoping that this year is even bigger and better. And I want to thank everyone who made it happen. But it was like that, seeing someone that's like you doing it and thriving it and knowing you're not alone is so powerful. And you can't teach that in a privileged world that they don't know. You say the sport of snowboarding to most is a hobby or an activity. For us, it's a life-saving fucking tool.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Mm-hmm. I love that. And I mean, that's an evolution of what you came to, like, you're like, and I talked to Sam Bertolino, the girl that got Terrier fired. And she was like, I wasn't against Terrier. That wasn't what I was against. I was against the claim of inclusion without the action. We need to see the actual action. Yeah. And a lot of people are like, well, if inclusion means Terrier gets fired, like count me out. Like, what kind of stupid inclusion is that? And I'm like, okay, there's a bigger picture going on here. And for me, Jess Camara opened my eyes to it, which was really nice. And it happened on the show.
Love Jess.
And Jess just was like, she looked me in the eyes on an unpublished episode because she was protecting me. She's like, you look like an idiot on that episode. I'll put it out on the Patreon with her permission. But I basically said to her, well, isn't all women's footage B footage? And she went, are you fucking serious right now?
I'm surprised she didn't headbutt you, which
which
give her full support to
yes,
do.
Yeah, me too. She said another thing in that conversation was like, because I was like, you look at the ads of Victoria and all those people back in the day, and it's like they're not doing what the guys are doing, or they're getting close. But I'm like, well, why include that? Just put the best stuff in there. She goes, you thought that was for you?
Yeah.
You thought the women's ad was for Eric? Like, what is wrong with you? We needed to see ourselves. There would be no Jess Camara without Victoria in the magazines. I needed to know that that was a goal to be reached for. I needed to know that I mattered in this community, that someone like me could try really hard and get to the point where they've got a top tier sponsorship from a top tier company like Burton, mm-hmm. right? And so what you're doing is doing the exact same thing. But you've taken it out of the realm of like, hey, look, we can get lots of money from the province and from the country and from RBC if we use this elite athlete model, because we want to be tied to these elite athletes.
They want the photos of the little like brown kids on the wall with the medals that they can show their homies. Right,
right. Whereas the focus needs to be reversed. It needs to be Aspen, Colorado, that is $210 US, $310 US for a lift ticket, which is like 500 Canadian for one lift ticket. Like if I want to take my family there, just like no hookups, no nothing. There are days of the year that I'm going to roll up there. It's going to be $2,000 for a day pass for my family. Sorry, but it's true. That's not accessible. So we need to flip it on its head and bring kids that deserve to be there. It's their fucking land. It's their ancestral territory. Need to be invited to participate and showed that this is a actual option, a life-saving option, like you say. I've heard lots of people say snowboarding saved their life. Yeah. They would have been going down a bad path. And they had all the privilege of a fucking, like someone just middle class in an economy that gives all those privileges to these people.
And like, I want to quickly, even then, I totally 100% agree. I want to go back on one quick reflection of Jess and everyone in the sports and like the rise of, women and other other identities in our sport. It's like the reason why that I'm like even more full of passion these days and back into watching movies and events is that the most exciting part about our industry now are our women skateboarders, the snowboarders, all the identities that are rising and thriving right now. I'm like, sorry, dudes, like in our culture, like we come from a matriarchal society. Like as men, we're just honored guests in a women's world. And like seeing how beautiful and technically awesome and like progressive the industry is now with their full inclusion, it's absolutely beautiful. Because what the worst thing was done back and before, it's like the definition of tokenism was sharing the platform without the power. So like I found myself out a lot within the early days of Whistler Blackcomb and working in the industry. I would be like, if you open up the trail map of Whistler, you see like my little brown face beside like an Asian face. And like I was a demographic catcher for images. I was used for ads and different things, but I was never like, after that photo shoot was over, I was never invited into the decision-making processes or like actually being able to change our sport. I was just like the face of a company that at that time was reluctant to give more.
That's fucking cool. Thank you for sharing that, because that's the really important piece. And Sam Bertolino, it's an unpopular opinion with certain demographics, but she was like, hey, hooray for Burton. Jake and Donna looked around a board meeting and saw that there was only Donna in that room. Everybody else was male. So they set a goal to have 50% of the people in that room be strong, empowered females by the end of 10 years or 15, whatever they did. And they reached that goal, where then they're in the room patting each other on the back going, look, we've done this. But as Sam mentioned, unless there's like a black trans woman who's disabled in that room. And I went, disabled? Like, seriously? And then I thought, fuck, why would I exclude disabled people from snowboarding? It's a life-saving tool. It's an empowerment tool. So let's include we need to include everybody.
Absolutely.
We need to keep fucking going until the demographic of the companies and the mountains that we ride looks like the planet Earth.
Yeah.
Right? So Sean Kearns actually asked me that, and I'm going to be interviewing him in a few days. He's like, this woke mentality thing. And at first he started from a place of kind of making fun of me. Like, oh, you're one of those woke dudes. And I was like, well, first of all, are you actually asking about what I'm talking about? Or have you already decided what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And
his unconscious bias.
Right.
You know?
But then he was like, he's actually a really, really caring person and a very, very supportive, awesome dude. And when I said the inclusion thing, I want everybody that I am friends with to feel 100% comfortable being their authentic self in front of me. I don't want them to come having to hide that they're anything. And I also don't want that to scare me away, you know? And I'm not there yet. And he was like, I can't speak for Sean, but he definitely said to me that he was inclusive in his worldview, and that his worldview also includes people who are resisting certain words and certain woke ideals and certain bullshit. Because, and now I'm adding this from my side, and all that weren't his words, but it's my interpretation of his sentiment. He's got a crazy bullshit meter, right? Like, so if you're a poser that shows up at a skate park, and he called me a poser. He was the very first person that I can remember calling me a poser. And I was like, stuck on that. And I was like, yeah, I kind of am a poser. That's true. And he was like, I was just ribbing you to make a point.
Yeah.
He's like, the poser woke people, fuck those guys. Like, that's not cool. Like, but also, I mean, if it's coming from the right place, like, try and lead them to where their actions are actually good and moving the needle. That's cool with me. But you've really articulated what's important about inclusion here, which is that marginalized people, And I'm going to bring it right to your mom, like someone that you had a relationship with and a deep, deep investment in their well-being was like, that's an absolute definition of trauma. And to bring strength to honor your mother. Sorry, this is...
No, you're
okay. Let me give me another shot at it. To see you honor your mother by the work that you're doing is one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. Thank you. Thank you for having that strength.
As you can hear, my dog is now also whapping her tail, and we also thank you. I wanted to acknowledge that that's incredibly meaningful, and we have even there's a picture for those who can see. There's a picture beside you of my great grandmother, and that was someone who went through residential school. And
Can I?
Yeah, absolutely. You can show everybody. It was done by a Anishnaabe artist. Yeah, Mary Panasse was her name. She was the wife of the last hereditary chief of the Fort William First Nation. So she gave me a beautiful bloodline to really honor, and know a lot of my leadership qualities come from the fact that I come from two distinct hereditary chief lines within our people, and that understanding more about myself gave me the power. I'm like, that's why I've always fallen into these kind of roles, and this is why my mother went through where she didn't have to, she didn't mean to go through it, but she did, and then she taught me so many beautiful lessons. And a friend went, because last year I was on a TV show that some people might recognize because it's Canada's most watched summer program, but it was the Amazing Race Canada that I participated on, and I met someone on there by the name of Julie Black, and she's an award-winning singer here in Canada. And she turned to me and she said, the one thing that'll always stick with me for life is that she goes, we're just here turning wounds into wisdom. And I was just like, that was like, so powerful, because you can sit in your wounds. I'm not saying for everyone needs to like just move on from it, but it's like, you never move on, you never forget, but like turn those wounds into something more powerful, something that's like not just a reaction, it's something that's deep and meaningful in thought.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm. I had a choice in my life where it was like, dive into the same things, like the habits, the drinking too much, or drugs that might have like been a coping mechanism for what I wanted to do. But it was like, I decided against that. That was just like, I couldn't do that. And that turned into that power transition of that pain into action, was something where then it came to my mind where I'm like, you know what? Instead of being in my sorrows and just being something that someone could use as an example of, another broken First Nations man, it was like, nah, I'm coming for everything my ancestors were denied. And that's where it's like, I can interject myself into the deep world of politicians now, into this world of all white ski resort owners, and all this like really rich world of cat operations and heli skiing operations, because I was like, nah, it's not that my imposter syndrome is holding me back. I'm going to come for everything our ancestors couldn't ever imagine doing.
That's dope, dude. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you for sharing with the listeners of the show and with me, your beautiful home, your amazing art, your incredible history, your incredible story, your resilience, but more so your spirit that's rising into spirit. I think you told me in the beginning of this conversation off mic that if you write a book, if there is a documentary about you, it would be called Imposter Syndrome. And I've totally got with that, but I mean, I think it's Rising Spirit, right?
Well, we have like a dual title, like Imposter Syndrome with the side of Rising Spirit.
It's such a beautiful...
The cookbook for true and reconciliation.
True reconciliation, right? Just true reconciliation. Yeah. I see that people are trying, and that raises my spirit. And I see that you are doing And I'm like, that's what I want to.
And it's like, I want to like tip my hat to you and other people's like you too. Cause it's like, people are slowly moved to becoming allies within what we're doing, but now they're also moving on to becoming accomplices or co-resistors. And like, when you're an accomplice, like you're right there beside me, you're in this, like, you know, you're not afraid to like, you know, speak up when I'm not around. If you're a co-resistor, you're like, you're fighting it with us alongside of us. But it's like, whether you're an ally, accomplice, or a co-resistor, you're all good for the cause. But when I'm doing cultural training, and we mentioned like the Burton team, I was lucky enough to do the cultural training this year for the Burton sales team in Canada. And I'm now, next week, I'm going to be doing the training for the Chill Foundation and training them about, you know, what we're actually doing. It's an opportunity now where like we're changing. We're changing the narrative. We're changing the dialogue that everyone's using, and it's. I feel very blessed.
Words are important. Words are very important, and thank you for sharing that bit, because my other friends and I have talked about the word ally. You can't really claim that word for yourself. Like you don't, like, I'm an ally. I was saying advocate because I do advocate for more knowledge to be shared in the world and places. But the labels, like inside, it's like, how do I feel? I feel like knowledge is key. Yep. So right here, I need to thank my wife, because she grew up on Manitoulin Island and had a body experience of living inside that trauma and seeing what was going on there. And so she did her work a long time ago.
So she's your mushkiki, which we call medicine. So she's your mushkiki, your medicine woman.
And so she led me to great resources out there. And I've said it on the show, and that usually means I'm cutting it out, but I'm putting this in. Yeah. If you want to become a helper in this, if you want to do your work, the number one thing that you can do is Google what you're trying to do. So don't call your friend and put work on them and say like, hey, teach me how to be better at being a white person in this world. Read the people that were inspired to teach other people how to help. Read those resources. They're right at your fingertips. There are YouTube videos about it. There are books about it. There are videos about it. And then that way, when you spend time with your BIPOC friends, you can just be friends.
Yep. And that's where like one of the toolkits that I'll give you to post on this as well too, where it's like, it's super easy and digestible. And I share with a lot of people that I do my training with, where it's called an Indigenous Ally Toolkit. And it was developed by some Indigenous students at McGill University. And it's like super digestible. And it's like, it says that it's like whether like what a definition of an ally, accomplice, and co-resistor is, but it also goes through as, okay, why are you doing this? Is this because this is like, for instance, is this a BuzzFeed that's like a socially thing that's going to be good for your popularity? Is this a work mandated thing? Are you doing this for like fun driven things? Like, and it kind of just calls out people are like, what are the real reasons why you're trying to do this? And I'll share this with your visitors as well too. And honestly, if anyone has questions, especially industry related people about this, hit me up on Instagram. It's simple as Blackbird Court. And we never got into it too much, but later on in life, when I met my grandparents from my dad's side, I was gifted my First Nations name, which is Siginaak. It's like Sig, S-I-G-I-N, Sig-in, and knock, like kind of how you knock on a door. And that simply means Blackbird in my anishnaabe culture. So a lot of people know me as Court. Larabee is my last name, but my traditional name going forward from that time and going forward for forever will be Siginaak, which means Blackbird. So most people know me as Blackbird now.
That's so sick.
Yeah.
Blackbird.
Yeah.
Siginaak. So as an English speaker, would I be right in calling you Blackbird or Siginaak, or either?
Either one. Some people they said, should I call you Court or should I call you Blackbird? And I said, here's the main difference. And I don't care either way because it's so irrelevant almost in a sense. But if you're talking to myself, like if I'm like, business work, whatever, call me Court. if you're talking to my spirit, call me Blackbird or Siginaak. So there's a difference. You're talking to my spirit, you're just talking to my face value. I can weed it out pretty quickly by the verbiage that people use.
That's very fucking cool, dude.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for all the things you've shared, being so open.
Thank you.
And also thank you for all the work that you're doing independently of like what we've talked about. Like you've got a lot of irons in the fire, obviously, and you're finding opportunities for yourself. And as you left the Whistler thing, someone filled your shoes. Is that correct?
They were hoping to. They're contractually obligated to, but since then they still haven't filled my role. It's been just under a year. Trying to find someone that did what I did with the connections that I had, and
cool.
And I hope they do find that person because they're out there. They may need, this is the first time that people like myself are doing these roles, so it's going to take time. It can't just populate a full HR department full of willing candidates that can do what we do, but they'll find their role. Unfortunately, I have to move on to help other people, and I'm joined what's called Heli Canada. I've just joined their Indigenous Advisory Board, so it might be a short-term contract, but I'm now going to be advising the association that does all the heli skiing and cat skiing operations in Canada, and hopefully guiding them in the same way that I helped guide Whistler Blackcomb.
So maybe someone who's watching the show today, because you're on it, will fill that role with Whistler Blackcomb.
Please do.
And then eventually someone's going to fill the role that you're creating or filling right now with Helicat.
Yeah.
Like it's amazing because these are doors you're opening that are going to just create more opening doors. It's dope, dude. It's so inspiring.
And I wouldn't be anywhere if it wasn't for other people opening those doors for me. And that mentality has to stay the same. There's a lot of like protectionism that happens sometimes in industry where it's like, no, this is my job. To have a solid succession plan of where we're going and who can take over the next generation is so important to us, because as Anishinaabe people, one of the key things that we make a part of our decision-making process is that at the end of every major decision-making decision, we say, how will this affect the next 7 generations? And that mentality is guiding me in what I'm doing now. And like, I may be helping open doors like other people have helped me get into it. And I've got a long list of people that I need to thank for getting me to where I am, because I'm nothing without the people that took time to help me.
Do you have it written down? Do you want to go into it?
Oh, I can. There's so many people that I can touch upon, but it's like the Pensieros, it's the Makepieces, it's the Jamie Lynns, it's all the people in our worlds. It's the Chief Leonard Andrews that you met. It's the chiefs from Squamish that welcomed me in. Honestly, it's the kids that were in our programs that told their parents that I was doing good or whatever it is. Like, those people open doors without me having to push it all the way myself.
Yeah, you've got a support system.
And that's what I want to be for everyone else. I don't want to be someone that someone remembers back in the day as a footnote. I'm like, okay, like I did all this stuff for the industry, but where's everyone behind me? Like right now, like I want to thank everyone on our ILSA programs. We have.
Are you kidding me?
It's fucking the royalty of our sport.
Yeah, if there's any question about whether you're plugged into the culture of snowboarding, holy shit, dude. Okay, so you were just starting to thank everybody from
I was just starting to thank everyone on our team. That's really, there's so many people that I'll forget, and still they'll take my forgiveness. But there's people like, the main people that stand out for me is like Michael Barton, who runs our skateboard programs now, who's an absolute shredder on his snowboard. Just got hooked up with some flow through Burton, and like anyone else, hit Mikey up, check him out. He's worth supporting in our industry. We have Chelsea McCutcheon, who's been doing snowboarding and mountain biking with our crew for so many years, has been a Burton ambassador. We have Sandy Ward, who's now running our mountain bike programs. She is just thriving, and like she's an Arc'teryx athlete now, and she is a producer of our really awesome film that I mentioned earlier, Slides in the Mountain. And
when is that coming out? Sorry to interrupt.
It's doing the film circuit right now. Finished Whistler, the IF3, the Banff one it knocked out, and we're having a premiere here in Nelson on December 5th.
Sick.
So it's going to be super rad, and so that's what she's doing. And then there's also like there's the Joelle Johnstons, there's the Ryan Johnstons, there's the Aiden Bakers, there's the Ashley Alberts, or the Nicole Alberts. I'm messing up names because I'm flowing through them all. The Aaron Marchands. There's everyone who's been a part of our team for so long. The Maya Antones, the people that are no longer just an athlete in our systems that are now giving back. We have this next generation of just tuned in, awesome Indigenous role models that are changing the world in every corner that the space they're taking up.
So sick, dude. You are just a gem of a human being. I'm so glad we made the time to do this.
Me
today.
too. And it was kind of funny. We were laughing about just on break there as we swapped over some memory cards. But it was like we were kind of laughing because while we were even sitting here, I got a message from Deanie, Jamie's partner, and then Jess Chimera messaged me, and Wes Makepeace sent me a message as well. Then Zach Aller, the Burton rep, and I was just like, this is how connected to the snowboard world that we are, and
so amazing, dude.
I couldn't change it for the world. I'm happy that we are inclusive enough to bring skiers into our crew as well too. But for the people who know me, you know where my heart really lies. Yeah,
man. Well, me too. I'm trying to do a 3-stop tour in the Vancouver local mountains. It's going to be called the Tri-Mountain Tour, and I'll have to reach out with you to definitely have inclusion. You'll have to help me make sure that is included in this shit.
We got you as a friend and an ally of yours. I'm always there. And for the events that you're throwing too, we're going to be partnering with 1910 for a bunch of events this winter. Sick. Just like-minded individuals, the Scotties, the Scos, the Jamies, like
good dudes.
What we're doing, they understand. And you know, if anyone were even to like pull up any of the photos of Jamie with the new Volcom wear of new LibTech boards this year. His board sponsors, as we know, haven't changed for many years. Yeah. But if you look at the top of his nose of his snowboard, just like behind you on the FNRad one, Ilsa sticker at the very top of his boards. And that was like, as a young kid having like, you know, his like, you know, road gap photo on my wall and like really looking up to that person. Now to have like that person rocking our Ilsa gear and supporting our movement is like, it's unfucking believable.
It's because he's authentic, so he sees it.
Yeah, we've bonded in so many different ways because we just get each other, and he's like one of the most genuine and kind people I've ever met.
He is. He really is. Freaking shout out to Jamie Lynn, of course,
and his fucking beautiful wife and Thalo, his son. There's like, it's that little family unit is my new little Nelson family, and it's like they're awesome. I'll do anything for them.
That's so sick, dude. Yeah. Hey, do you want to come for burgers?
Yeah,
you got time?
We got burger month here in Nelson. All the places are making wild and crazy burgers, and dude, I'm hungry. After chatting and feeling all this good work we're doing, we earned it. Dude,
killer. All right. Thank you very much, Blackbird. Thank you very much, Court. Fucking love you, dude.
Love you too.
Epic.
Yeah, miigwech.
FNRad shoutouts this week to Court Larabee. Special thanks to Billywood Designs on Hastings Street here in Vancouver, where at Court's suggestion I found some broken skateboard art that I love. Shoutouts to everyone who supports the FNRad Patreon. It's growing steadily, and I'm working on making it really worth your while. So get out there, check out the perks, and be sure to come back next week for more FNRad snowboarding presented by Skyview Campers and brought to you by FNRad Productions. If you've always wanted to support the show with your hard-earned cash, now's the time to pause, go to Patreon, and search out FNRad. Join one of our tiers. You'll get ad-free episodes every week, one day early, plus more cool stuff.